There is a ship sitting in the middle of a desert. A real one. A steel fishing trawler, the kind built to haul nets full of carp and sturgeon, marooned in the dry heart of Central Asia. It sits tilted on the sand, its hull eaten orange by rust, its propeller half buried. Children climb on its deck, and there is not a drop of water anywhere in sight. Not a river, not a lake. Just dry, cracked earth and pale salt blowing across the horizon in every direction. This ship did not crash here. It did not wash ashore in a storm. It is sitting exactly where it always floated, in what used to be one of the largest bodies of water on the entire planet. The ship didn't go anywhere. The sea did. This is the story of the Aral Sea, a body of water bigger than some entire countries that human beings managed to drain almost completely within a single human lifetime. And it is one of the strangest, saddest, and most important places on the map. On the border between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, in the dry heart of Central Asia, there once lay an inland sea so vast it was the fourth largest lake on Earth. In 1960, it covered around 68,000 square kilometers, bigger than the whole of Sri Lanka. It was a true sea in miniature. Blue water stretching past the horizon, islands, gulls, and a coastline dotted with busy fishing ports. A desert is the last place you'd expect to find a sea this size. So how did it get there? Two great rivers. From the snowmelt of distant mountains, the high, cold ranges of the Pamirs and the Tian Shan, the Amu Darya flowed up from the south, and the Sir Darya came in from the northeast, pouring their water across hundreds of miles of dry land and emptying, at last, into the Aral. For thousands of years, those two rivers kept the sea alive. The Aral has no outlet to any ocean. It was simply the place where all that mountain water came to rest, balanced for millennia between the rivers pouring in and the fierce desert sun drawing it back up into the sky. It was a delicate balance, and it held, as long as the rivers kept arriving. Cut off the rivers, and the sea would have nowhere to come from. And in the 1960s, that is exactly what happened. In the middle of the 20th century, the Soviet Union looked at the deserts of Central Asia and saw not emptiness, but opportunity. It wanted cotton, vast quantities of it, a crop so valuable here that it earned a nickname, white gold. But cotton is thirsty and the desert is dry. So Soviet planners made a decision that would reshape the entire region. They would take the two rivers feeding the Aral Sea and divert them through an enormous network of canals to irrigate millions of acres of cotton fields instead. The plan worked, at least for the cotton. By the late 1980s, Uzbekistan had become one of the largest cotton exporters in the world, and the green of irrigated fields spread across land that had been bare desert. But the system was staggeringly wasteful. The canals were mostly unlined ditches cut straight through sand, so vast and so leaky that much of the diverted water never even reached the crops. It simply soaked away into the ground or evaporated under the sun before it could do any good. The sea was being emptied not only to grow cotton, but to water the desert itself. And the engineers behind it were not entirely in the dark about the cost. The shrinking of the Aral was, to some degree, anticipated, even considered an acceptable price for the cotton. What almost no one grasped was just how fast and how completely a sea could die when you quietly turned off the two taps that fed it. At first, the change was slow. The shoreline crept back a little each year, a few meters, then a few hundred. But the Aral was losing far more water to sun and diversion than the trickle of the rivers could replace. And so, decade by decade, the sea began to disappear. By the late 1980s, the water had dropped so far that the Aral split in two, a smaller North Aral in Kazakhstan and a much larger South Aral straddling the border. By 2007, the sea had shrunk to roughly a tenth of its original size, breaking apart into separate lakes. And in 2014, the eastern basin of the South Aral did something it had not done in some 600 years. It dried up completely, a flat, empty pan where a sea had been within living memory. What rose in its place was not desert in the old sense. It was something brand new, a salt-crusted wasteland so young it had to be given a name. They call it the Aralkum, the Aral Sands. A desert tens of thousands of square kilometers wide that simply did not exist a lifetime ago. You can stand in the middle of it today and know that the ground beneath your feet was, not long ago, the bottom of the sea. But a vanished sea leaves more behind than empty space. It leaves the people who lived on its shore. Come back now to that rusting trawler from the very beginning. It belongs to a town called Moynaq. Once, Moynaq sat on the southern shore of the Aral, a thriving fishing town of around 20,000 people, with a busy harbor and canneries processing the daily catch. Today, the water is gone, not a little way out. Moynaq now sits well over 100 kilometers from the nearest shoreline. And on the dry bed of its old harbor rests one of the most haunting sights on Earth, a graveyard of ships. Rusting fishing trawlers left exactly where they were moored, stranded on the sand as the water pulled away beneath them and never came back. The fishing industry, the lifeblood of the whole region, which had once supplied a sizable share of the Soviet Union's catch, collapsed entirely. The canneries fell silent. The boats had nowhere to go. But the damage went far beyond lost jobs. The exposed seabed was laced with salt and with decades of agricultural chemicals, fertilizers and pesticides, washed down by the rivers and left behind as the water evaporated. Winds pick that up and hurl it across the land as toxic dust storms, salt and poison carried for hundreds of kilometers, settling on fields and homes and lungs. The climate itself turned harsher. The sea had once softened the seasons, and without it, the summers grew hotter and the winters colder. For the people who stayed, the vanished sea brought a slow tide of respiratory illness and other serious health problems. An entire community had been built around a sea, and then the sea was taken out from under it. There is one more secret the retreating water uncovered, and it is a strange and uneasy one. Out in the middle of the Aral, there had been an island called Vozrojdeniya. For decades, it was one of the most closely guarded places in the Soviet Union, because hidden on it was a secret open-air test site for biological weapons. Its isolation was the entire point. A remote island in a wide sea, far from any prying eyes. But as the Aral shrank, that isolation quietly dissolved. The water around the island kept dropping, and around 2001, the gap finally closed. Vozrojdeniya stopped being an island at all and became a peninsula, joined to the mainland by dry land. A site chosen precisely because no one could reach it had become a place anyone could simply walk to. In the years that followed, an international cleanup effort moved in to deal with hazardous material that had been buried there, decontaminating the old burial sites in 2002. It is a sober reminder that when a sea disappears, it doesn't just take the water. It can give up the things that were hidden beneath and within it. For a long time, the story of the Aral had only one direction: down. But in the north, that changed. In the early 2000s, Kazakhstan decided to try to save what was left of the smaller North Aral Sea. With support from the World Bank, engineers built a dam across the narrow channel that had been letting the North's water drain away into the dying south. It's called the Kok-aral Dam, and it was finished in 2005. The idea was simple: trap the water of the Sea Darya in the north and let the North Aral fill back up. It worked, and faster than almost anyone dared hope. Water levels that scientists thought might take years to recover rose within months. The sea crept back across the dry flats toward the old port towns it had abandoned decades before. As the volume grew, the water grew less salty until it could once again support life. And the fish, gone for years, returned, carried back in by the Sea Darya until the nets were heavy again and the fishing boats went back to work. It is not a full recovery. The vast southern sea remains largely lost and may never come back. But in the north, against the odds, a real and living piece of the Aral exists once more, and the towns beside it have a future again. We like to think of a sea as one of the permanent things, too vast, too ancient, too powerful to ever truly go away. The Aral is the proof that this isn't so. A body of water the size of a small country was undone almost entirely by human hands inside a single lifetime. Not in some distant geological age, within the memory of people still living on its shore. And yet, in the north, those same human hands built a dam, and a corner of the sea came back. The same species that can drain a sea can also, it turns out, begin to heal one. Maybe that's the real lesson sitting out there in the rust and the salt, that the map is not fixed, that what we do to a place matters, and that even the largest wounds are not always beyond repair. If this one stayed with you, subscribe, because next time on Margins of the Map, we travel to two tiny islands in the freezing Bering Strait that sit just a couple of miles apart, and yet are almost a whole day apart in time. Thanks for watching.